Welcome to your punctibyte for the week of October the 15th. I'm traveling home from the ski camp in Nebraska where we had an awesome time. It was fabulous weather and we got in a lot of great training, and I had a lot of awesome quality time with the athletes. I figured that you guys would appreciate a punctibyte from the car ride home, or at least that Spurlock and Jesse would appreciate my sunglasses. So that being said, let's hop into your punctibyte for this week, beginning with some scheduling. And of course, remember that this is your practical exam, your first practical exam week. So on Tuesday, that's what our entire day will be spent doing. For those of you, Callie and Jesse and Sydney and John and Andy and Josh, you're all going to meet me at 5 p.m. on the 14th, that is tomorrow, for lab practical setup. And we're going to get everything ready to go so that we can turn it around early in the morning and have a successful time. Do remember that you need an answer sheet for that, and also a reminder that that is found on your TA CD. So all you have to do is to modify that. So I'm actually just going to bring that up so that you can take a look at it and see what this looks like on your jump drive. So you just go into the main part of the jump drive, and then once you're in here, you should be able to click on practical questions and then find that practical exam number 1 answer sheet. And then the only thing that you should need to do to this is to delete this part right here that says you can adjust this to different versions. So delete that, and then make sure that the blanks are correct for your versions. Then if you want me to print it for you, I would be glad to do so, like make copies. Please just send it my way and I'll make sure that you have plenty of copies for your lab section. So that's first task that we have towards the practical. Then we'll set up on Monday for the morning versions, and then for Aaron and Kyle and Tara and Amanda and Trevor and Jen, we'll set up at noon on the 15th. Now I know that not all of you can make it at noon, so if you can't, then make sure that somebody from your lab section is there to represent, so that I for one thing, know exactly what questions you have, because I think I've only received part of your questions, and to make sure that we get everything turned over appropriately at noon. So that then takes us into Thursday, and we're looking towards Thursday for our first lab that focuses on biochemical testing, which we can get jazzed about. That should be really fun. It is also a very substantial lecture, so I'll talk about that in a moment. But I also want to draw your attention to the fact that Amanda, Jen, and Trevor will be doing open lab on Friday, and that our midterm grades are due on that day as well. So here's the service that I would like to offer you. Remember how I showed you how to download grades on Canvas on the last punctibyte? So if you want to just go back to that punctibyte and remind yourself of how to download those grades, you can. Or if you're still feeling a little bit uncomfortable with that and how to add it up and everything once you download the .csv file, what I'd like to offer is on Friday during open lab or during or after, we can talk about how to go about the addition of the points for the midterm grades, because I don't need those until late in the day on Friday or even Saturday morning. So we just want to get them turned around as quickly as we can. That also means that we want to try to get the practical exam graded pretty quickly. And one word to the wise, one really easy way to go about that is to actually grade immediately after your practical gets over. The rad thing about that is that you can also go back to the practical version and check to see if the answers that the students gave might have been more appropriate than you thought they might have been. That is to say, sometimes questions get bumped or adjusted, or something's a little different about the way the students are seeing it than what you had in the key, and that enables you to go right back and look at the question. So just a thought, not required in any way, but just something that sometimes works well. So let's talk now about Lab 15, and I want to just briefly go through the TA guidelines for that lab. This is a huge TA guideline. Like, this is by far the largest that we have, and a big reason for that is that this begins a series of labs that goes all the way through Lab 21. And so in this lecture, we are setting the foundation for labs all the way through Lab 21. So with that being said, it's important that the quality of Lab 15 lecture is high. It's also important that we explain to the students why that lecture needs to be a little bit larger, a little more cumbersome, because we are setting that stage for what will come. So a couple of things with regards to the guidelines. One is you'll notice that we are doing throat swabs. So down here near the bottom, we talk about that throat swab procedure. And I would really appreciate it if we got the students doing their throat swabs first before we break out the Streptococcus pyogenes. Just a smart idea. But then from there, as we were talking about streps and staphs and the gram-negative Pseudomonad ACA versus Enterobacteriaceae, making some of those important differentiations is really a good idea. So just as a bit of a review for everyone, remember that the primary way to differentiate between staphs and streps is to use the catalase test. But one thing that is confusing to students is that in lecture, I talked about the catalase test as a test that should come up positive for things that can live in the presence of oxygen. So it's important to explain that to them that although streps come up negative, it's not because streps can't live in the presence of oxygen, as we know they can, right, in the throat, but it is because they have a pseudo-catalase enzyme rather than true catalase, and so they don't bubble in the presence of hydrogen peroxide. So recognizing that as an important test to differentiate the staphs and the streps is one of the big take-home messages for this lecture and for all future biochemical testing. In terms of the staphs, it's also not a bad idea to talk a little bit about all of the potential virulence of Staph aureus, but to also recognize that it can be a normal flora of the skin, even though it can cause disease. So we recognize it as being responsible for things like boils, abscesses, wound infections, all the way to food poisoning, and producing a lot of cytolytic toxins, and this goes into we call them the quote-unquote hemolysins, but remember that they have different categories. There are the alpha, beta, delta, and gamma cytolytic toxins that are all collectively termed the hemolysins, or the heme lysine or hemoglobin lysine, right, is the term from which that derives. So red blood cell damage is where that term comes from. It may be worth looking through some of the depths of that, and if you would like to borrow my medical microbiology book, that would be fantastic. If you don't want to give this lecture and you would like me to rather to take it on, that would also be fantastic. So totally up to you. Do also recognize that those are not the only toxins produced by Staph aureus, and that there are many others as listed here, and things you should go ahead and go through and review. It's also important, and sometimes it's hard to think about the fact that we give time to both the staphs and the micrococci, even though the micrococcus species are actually not considered particularly pathogenic. And that's because, in fact, in any given swab, you're likely to get both micrococci and staphylococcus. And so the ability to differentiate pathogenic from non-pathogenic is really, really important. For the streps, there's a very long list of pathogenic streps. We don't go through all of them, and we tend to focus on the group A streps and talk a little about the group B streps. Also, do take note that the group A streps, not only do they cause strep throat and scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, but they're also the notorious pathogens that cause necrotizing fasciitis, or the flesh-eating disease. I kind of like bringing that up in class because that wow factor brings in some interest from the students and really gets them jazzed. So looking through this long list of strep pyogenes, toxins and hemolysins and whatnot, it would be a good idea to review some of this so that you can add a little bit to your lecture as you go. And a note on the streptolysins. The streptolysin O is we can only see streptolysin O at the bottom of a stab mark because it's inactivated by oxygen. That is to say, it is oxygen labile. So that is why we see it at the bottom of the stab mark, is because it isn't exposed to oxygen there once the auger closes back up. So it wouldn't hurt to explain that, especially, like, it doesn't need to be part of your lecture, but as you're walking around talking to the students, it's great if you can tell them why it is that they're stabbing the plate so that they understand the difference between what they're doing to a BAP versus what they're doing to an MSA. It really helps to give them some background on why it is they're doing what they're doing. And by the way, I just wanted to make note that that's a really great thing to do during labs anyway, is to come up with something that you think is important to talk to the students about and go around to each individual group and tell them. And some of you are really, really awesome about that. But sometimes it's easy to also think, well, gosh, they're doing fine. They don't really need me. I don't think I'm needed in this picture here. But in fact, if you do something like that, suddenly you'll start to notice that students will start asking you things, and it will inspire their questions. So it's a great thing to do. So also talking of the Enterobacteriaceae versus the Pseudomonaceae, be sure to bring their attention to the oxidase test. We've talked in lecture about the oxidase test, but I feel like that concept gets in about as well or about as little as it could. It just really doesn't permeate very well. So if you want to spend a little more time explaining that the terminal oxidoreductase, that is cytochrome C oxidase, is the component of the ETC that is the final component of the mitochondrial ETC, that is what we're testing for in bacteria. Pseudomonas has it, Neisseria has it, other bacteria don't. So important to bring their attention to that oxidase test. Okay, great. I'm actually going to end things off by just saying a couple words about the immense improvement that I've seen in lectures. Please, I want you all to know that I have been noticing how much work you've been putting into your lectures and how much they've improved. Some of you returning TAs this last week, this last week particularly, either Lab 12 or 13, gave the best lecture that you've ever given. And one of the reasons for that was that you actually started to visually show students things. You started using anecdotes. I know that Kyle was using the model of the bacteriophage, and by using that model, that visual model, he was able to bring everybody's attention back to the components of the phage and to reactivate their attention. I saw Amanda really giving the best lecture I think she's ever given. I know you don't necessarily agree, when you were talking about the fungus among us, and part of that was just such clarity in your lecture, and the anecdotes that you were able to share from your experience in the research lab and bringing in what were some of the departmental researchers and how they work on yeast mitochondria, and that was really cool to see you exploring the way in which you could synthesize connections between your experiences and what you were lecturing about. So a lot of absolutely excellent stuff going on, and I'm really proud of you, and I promise that I will try to bring in a video camera. I've got to figure out the best way to do that, but that will be my next goal so that you can see yourselves give a lecture. So fun times, right? Have a fantastic rest of the weekend, and you all rock my world.